Hello, everybody, and welcome to the General Collective Podcast with Rod Dreher. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and we are back for our weekly jam session. Rod, how goes the battle? How are things, man?
You shouldn't have put it that way, since I'm living so close to the war zone. But I think things are fine here. Everybody's still really tense here in Hungary. The currency is falling dropping like a stone.
Right.
They're not the only one. So people are still really, really, really worried that the war is going to come here. This morning, I did something very Hungarian. A Hungarian friend of mine invited me to join him at the Rudas baths. This is a bathhouse. They have many of them here in Hungary because there's so many thermal springs naturally occurring in the hills here. And this particular one, I think it's the oldest one in the city. It was built, the core of it was built by the Ottomans in the 16th century. And it's old school, man.
Yeah.
And you go there, and I mean, it's for men and women now, but today was a men and women day. Some days it's all female, some days it's all male. But you go in, you get changed, and then you get in this octagonal pool that's warm with natural spring water. It smells like sulfur in the air.
Yeah.
What I found so interesting about it, I mean, most people who listen to our podcast don't care about a thermal bath, but this was so social. The place was full of Hungarian, mostly men, but I think their wives. There were older people. There were some big bellies in those pools.
Good for them.
Yeah, but one thing that was so interesting is I fell into conversation. There were English speakers there too about politics and the war. That's what everybody's talking about, and it occurred to me at one point while having all these conversations that these kind of conversations must have happened in this pool so many times over the centuries. When the Ottomans ruled the city, when the Habsburgs, on and on and on, and people still keep coming in the morning to sit in the warm water and talk.
Yeah.
When one of the things that really got to me, I was talking to this one guy there who was Hungarian British, raised in both countries, and the Hungarians have no love for the Russians, right? But this guy I was talking to really hates what's going on. And we were talking about the cancellation of Russian artists and all that. I know you and I want to talk about that later, but he was talking about the hypocrisy of the West. We got to talking about this new interview that Viktor Orban, the prime minister here, gave to a conservative magazine. They put it into English. I put it on my TAC blog, where Orban was talking.
The link is below, everybody.
And Viktor Orban was talking about how the world is changing very quickly. And he was talking about the Chinese are the rising power, Orban was, and the Americans are the declining power. And he said something really interesting. He said, the Chinese are easy to deal with because, they don't moralize anything. For them, it's all about power. You know exactly where you stand. The Anglo-Saxons, he said, and I think he meant Western liberals, the American-dominated order, but certainly Western liberals do this. He said they have to cloak everything with morality. They have to make you believe that they are good. I found that so interesting because true. It set this Hungarian guy off, British guy off. He goes, I grew up in England. He goes, London is one of the most corrupt cities in the world. It is the world capital of money laundering. That's what all the oligarchs are. And yet their prime minister, but he can speak several languages, has a funny haircut, and went to Eton. He presumes to lecture Hungary and the rest of us in Central Europe. And man, this guy just took off. And he said that we all know, meaning the Central European countries, we know they look down on us, and they have no right to look down on us. And so he has a weird bit of sympathy, even though he hates what Russia has done. He wants us to lose the war. He has a weird bit of sympathy. He said that the Russians are now learning what we all know too, that we, Central Europeans, are junior partners in Europe. They look on us as savages who need to be tutored, and they hide from themselves, meaning the West, hide from themselves behind these moral narratives, their own raw desire for power.
It's funny. I highlighted that exact line in that Orban in the piece we have linked below here from Orban, that the Chinese, I think here I have it right here. He says, we know that the world is under Anglo-Saxon dominance, but we don't yet know what the world will be like when there's Chinese dominance, which is, as you note, like, ooh, wow, ooh, there it is. One thing is for sure, the Anglo-Saxons want the world to recognize their position as morally right. For them, it's not enough to accept the reality of power. They also need you to accept the things that they think are right. The Chinese have no such need. And I tell you, man, that was really striking, because this is, you and I have kind of hinted about this idea for a while. And, I know our friends, and frenemies on the post-liberal right, talk about these sorts of things. But what continues to amaze me is the inability of people in the West, mostly, of a liberal progressive variety, but beyond that too, just simply aren't aware of their own moral righteousness and their biases. They really do believe in this sort of morally neutral canard. And it's just not true. And it's fascinating to hear you and hear of you and your conversations that you're having out there, because it must be quite stark for you to see that.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, of course, I didn't fall off the turnip truck. I knew it was there from coming to Europe. But this war illuminates it so strongly. And this one guy, the Hungarian British guy, was talking about the upcoming election here in Hungary. It's going to be in a month, April 3rd, and he was talking about how everybody knows that Orban is the bête noire of Western Europe. In fact, just today, as you and I are talking, I saw there was news that one of a German social democratic leader has called on the EU to intervene in the Hungarian election against Orban, which is illegal. Wow. But this is how they see it. Anyway, this guy was telling me, he said a few years ago here in Hungary, Orban got angry because George Soros was putting in so much of his money, his fortune, to promote his political views here. Right. And Orban said, this isn't right. This guy, he's not even Hungarian. As we know, Soros was born in Hungary, but he's not, right. He hasn't lived here forever. And he is a billionaire from outside of here who's trying to change the policies of this country. And I think there must have been some kind of law passed forbidding that from happening. Right. Well, the Hungarian guy was telling me, okay, fine. But and this was widely condemned in the West. But now we have in the West, they're banning RT, the Russia Today, Russia State Television, and they're canceling anything Russian, and that makes sense to people. But we can't go against against people like Soros here and keep him from messaging. And whether I don't know anything about this Hungarian law, so I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but the guy had a point. And he also said, I got to leave you with this. He said, why is it that the Russians have oligarchs, but we just have billionaires? Right. He said, He said, I think Jeff Bezos is the biggest oligarch in the West. I said, the idea that Mark Zuckerberg can't get what he wants politically is just absurd. He goes, I know. And the guy said, I'm not defending the Russian oligarchs. I'm just saying that there's a lot of duplicity here, of double-mindedness and of hypocrisy on the part of the West.
Well, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, the day before, and Matt Taibbi, the this left Substack guy, he's really quite interesting. He's really truly independent. He's got his own thing. Longtime writer for the Rolling Stone. Anyway, he lived in Russia for about 10 years.
In the 1990s.
In the 1990s, right when, it was moving, it changed essentially overnight. And he was talking a little bit about how these Russian oligarchs were created. And it was really a fascinating insight. I had not known all of the details, but basically, they are called oligarchs because they were basically given, they were given free money to buy shares in all these companies that became privatized, overnight, basically. And so they were, friends of people in power and all of this. And so, so I think what I guess the distinction that I would draw in my head, and, I'm not a fan of Bezos or Zuckerberg, but at least Jeff Bezos built Amazon.
Oh, sure.
And but effectively speaking, there might be a difference, between young Jeff Bezos and current Jeff Bezos, or young Zuckerberg and current Zuckerberg. Power likes to continue to amass itself, right? And so, the sort of that revolutionary zeal, perhaps, of a youngster turns into a sort of a conservative, quote unquote, conservative old guard when you get older, or something like that.
Yeah, I think the point that my interlocutor was making, though, is it's not about how you got your money. I mean, you're right. The oligarchs came to power in a very dirty way, but rather the way you use money and power for your own interests. I mean, what makes an oligarch in our political terminology is a rich guy who is a servant of political power.
Right.
And a political power a person holding political power who serves the rich. And that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
One of the guys in the pool with me today was talking about how he had once lived in America, and he said he lived in Memphis, in fact, and he said that, I tell you, he said, if we have a worldwide depression, which he believes could happen if China attacks Taiwan, and he said places like Memphis are going to come apart. He goes, because
why so?
His thought is, he said, society has broken down so much there, and there's so many guns everywhere in America, and the sort of things that hold society together have like strong families, strong communities. He said those really don't exist in Memphis like they do even here in Europe, which is which it also has some poor areas. And I just found that really fascinating to think about, and well,
let's talk about that. I mean, the thing that immediately struck me about the relative fragility of our systems, you and I tend to talk about these things in terms of culture and family structures and all of that, and I still think that's all very important stuff. But what struck me immediately in March or April of 2020, is that when COVID happened?
Yeah, 2020, around the 1st of March 2020.
Yeah, 2020. All right. Yeah. Okay. So we're coming up on that right now, because what is it? We're in March right now. So 3 years ago, what struck me immediately was the run on weird items, and I know things like toilet paper and that's a sort of a mimetic game. People are like, oh my gosh, people are buying toilet paper, I should buy toilet paper. That sort of thing. That's not what I'm talking about. That's its own issue and its own problem, and certainly worth thinking into. But I remember looking at, like Tylenol. Like there was it was hard to get Tylenol. And I remember looking, why is it hard to get Tylenol? What does this have to do with COVID? It's, well, we've outsourced all of our drug manufacturing to China. So, and then you start looking, okay, what else have we sort of outsourced? And what you see in these globalized systems are these very thin, tenuous connections that kind of hold everything together, and they operate very efficiently in ideal situations. But I think we're seeing that the global markets are a kind of a hothouse flower, fragile. I'm not being terribly articulate this morning, I'm sorry, but in other words, like in the optimal conditions, everything's great, everything's cheap, everything's fast, everything happens. But you alter that like ever so slightly, and all of a sudden, you can't get real things. Well, exacerbate that with political unrest. What are we looking at here?
I was telling the guy, we were talking about Memphis, and he said, I mean, this is a white guy, Hungarian, but he said in Memphis is 70% black, and it has all the problems that poor black cities have. And I was telling him, in Baton Rouge, where I'm from, we're at 52% black, and I read the newspaper, the Baton Rouge paper online, and Now they're having shootings like young black male drug dealer type shootings have moved out of North Baton Rouge into South Baton Rouge.
Interesting.
Yeah, you're from
Interesting.
Baton Rouge too. So when I tell
And
you
that's where I'm from. I mean, I'm from South Baton Rouge.
right. That's where I live now when I'm not in Budapest. And so you'll know what I mean when I tell you there was a targeted assassination of 2 people the other day outside the Mall of Louisiana.
Whoa.
And yeah. I mean, this is like really, no, it's crazy. But this is, and people, and at night you go out driving down Segan Lane, which, for non-Baton Rougeans there, this is like really the main drag in South Baton Rouge. Right. And they're like shootings from car to car. And these are all young black men, from North Baton Rouge who are shooting each other. And so the violence gets racialized very quickly. I was telling this young guy about a guy I know in Baton Rouge, an older man white man who, when all the working class people moved out of North Baton Rouge from around the Exxon plant in the 70s, his family stayed. They were working class, they stayed. Right. And this old man stayed in the house after his parents died. And he only recently moved out because he's old and it's getting too violent to stay. Yeah. But he spent all his life as a white man living in a black neighborhood. And I asked him to help me understand what's going on there. What hope is there? And he said, I honestly have no idea, said this guy. He goes, I've lived there my whole life and I've seen the collapse of the black family. He said the only things holding those communities together now are the grandparents, people his age. He said, and they're dying off. He said, when they go, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm like, well, what should we as white people who live in this city, how can we help? What should we do? He said, we've got nothing to do here. He said, we have no authority. If this is going to get solved, it's going to be solved by the black community. And what this guy who's very sympathetic, he lived there all his life. He worked until his retirement for an anti-poverty organization in the black community. Right. He's sympathetic, but he's like, that's how bad things have broken down there. And of course, as we all know, we've all read our Charles Murray, and we know the same breakdown that has destroyed the black community, breakdown of family and community, is now in working class whites and spreading. So all of that is to say that this came up in the conversation I had today with this Hungarian guy who had lived in America. And he's focusing so tightly on this country, his country, Hungary, on like, how can we ride this out, the wave that's coming?
Right. And, and there, you mentioned, that there's this, this is part of this networked world that we live in, that the networks of the great promise, that you can create efficiencies and generate wealth, and all of these things are in one sense goods, right? But, I don't know if it's because I saw, this is going to be funny, I think, or lame, I don't know. But I remember seeing Terminator 2, whenever that came out, like sometime in the 90s. And, that was the one where Arnold Schwarzenegger comes back as the sort of the friendly robot that's going to protect Sarah Connor and all that. But,
a sweet murder robot.
Yeah. But the first one, of course, is a classic. I really, actually, I like both of them, to be fair. Anyway, the through line, the way in which this war of the machines against humans starts is when the computers become networked and they become self-aware, right? And I am not a technologist, I am not a specialist, I don't know any of this sort of stuff, but I remember that idea of and as soon as one machine achieved consciousness in the story, then they all do, because they're all connected. It's like it's instantaneously, because it's fiber, right? It's all automatic. And so with a flip of the switch, it turns, the whole thing turns. And, that's, the power of the network, right? That once all these things are connected, the great part about networks is that when they're connected, they're force multipliers in a good sense, right? That things are connected and we can do things well and efficiently. But if that's corrupted, right? If that's co-opted, or if that's gamed or flipped or turned, well, as good as something can be is now as bad as something can be. And so that's why I'm focused on some things like supply lines and our global economy and all these sorts of things. What really troubles me is sort of that being haunted by the sort of the Terminator idea of the network that becomes activated against the humans. And so I look at what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, and how does that affect gas prices right away? I mean, we're seeing gas prices jump 50% or 100%. Sorry, I can't imagine what it's like in Germany or in Hungary or in Europe where it's like right away. I went to the grocery store 3 days ago, and I'm telling you, like a piece of a package of ground beef that I bought for $13, a month ago is like $22 now for the same thing. I mean, I was really blown away. And now that's part that's inflation, right? But you can see the shock waves that are kind of going through. Sure. It's hard to tell, what's real.
Yeah, well, interesting you put it that way. I have been thinking a lot since the Russia-Ukraine war started about the way our networked social media and news media networks, how can you tell what's real? I mean, Ukraine is winning, it seems to me, in the West at least, the social media war. But like the whole Ghost of Kiev thing, not true. The 13 people who said F you, F your mothers or whatever to the right, not true. And I put that out because, and I realized, dang, it was too good not to be true. Plus they had audio that they said was real. And of course, the Russians are trying to do this too. They're just not as good at it. And they don't have a Zelensky figure. I mean, he's Luke Skywalker and Putin is Darth Vader. Nevertheless, I bring this up because I was in Madrid at a conference this week, and I had dinner one night, and the guy sitting on my right side was a professor from a Western European country. I'll just leave it at that, who had moved. He's younger than I am, but he had moved with his wife and kids to a Central European country to take a job at a university, making a lot less money because he couldn't take his country anymore. I'm like, well, tell me why. And he said that his part of the world where his family had been in their country had been overrun by Islamic immigrants who were militants. And he said, a couple of years ago, we're in the city, my hometown, and the large Muslim population decided they were not going to obey traffic regulations, parking regulations. And the city just accepted it. The mayor and all the rest just said, okay, we can't do anything about it. He said, this sort of thing keeps going on. And you realize, wait a minute, we are occupied by people who do not share our values, who spit on our values, who don't want to obey our laws, and we're too afraid to defend ourselves. He said the thing that finally turned him was when the young adult son of a prominent local imam put on Instagram a video calling for the murder of Jews and Christians. This became widely known in the city. Nobody said anything because they were terrified.
Of course.
And he said, my family said, it's over here. And he told me that his mother and father had a vacation cottage somewhere on the coast in Brittany, in France. Yeah. He said, me and my brothers, we'd go there all the time when I was a kid. And he said, I used to love to go down there as a young man. And they had an oyster bed on the beach. And he said, I would take a bottle of cold white wine and an oyster knife and go sit there and just shuck oysters and eat. And it was paradise. He said, the last time we went there a few years ago, he said, I went down to the oyster bed and there was this tall male African immigrant who was pissing in it. Like, wait, really? He said, yeah, I was just urinating. He said, the guy didn't know it was an oyster bed, but he said, this was such a symbol of what has happened to Europe.
Wow, yeah.
We cannot or will not stop this waves and waves of immigrants. They come here, they don't know anything about our culture, but they don't respect it either. Yeah. And he said that was the thing between the son of the imam in his hometown and the family's cottage in France. They just picked up and moved to Central Europe.
And I think what this is exposing to me, is just the thin veneer of civilization, stretched, scraped butter-like over a crusty piece of bread. Like it's just not that thick.
Oh, yeah.
and just sort of general civility and sociality. Like it's just not that robust. And
No, no.
I think I saw something just yesterday. There was a Walgreens in San Francisco, and you'll see these videos, and they'll come out and just like right in the middle of the day, some guys will go in there and they got a bag. They may or may not be wearing a mask. I think they're wearing a mask because of COVID, LOL. And just taking stuff.
Yeah,
Just taking
Walgreens
stuff.
the corporate policy is the employees have to sit there and watch it because it's too dangerous to intervene.
I mean, Rod, this is not sustainable. I mean, this is not, you can't have a community or a town or a society in which the basics of the rule of law and personal property are not respected. I mean,
Right.
how can you live together this way?
Right. You can. And the reason I even brought that up, I'm to get back around to it, was the professor and I started talking about the media. I said to the professor, I said, I mean, you just sort of hear that this stuff happens every now and then. He goes, well, of course, our media don't report it either. They're part of the same class that doesn't want to see it. And I said, yeah, we have that in America too. Our media is very much on the left, and it's very, very selective what gets reported. And then that tipped us off into talking about propaganda. The Russians are the ones who do propaganda, which they certainly do, but not us. Well, hell yeah, we do propaganda. If we haven't learned by now, if conservatives haven't learned by now that our news media is basically a propaganda outfit, then we are ineducable on the point.
But you know what? This is what I'm my sense making mechanism, for what it's worth, is on overdrive right now. I've sort of made a kind of personal swear, like I'm not going to tweet anything about the war because I can't tell what's real, what's fake, what's a deep fake. But you're right. Like as a conservative, I think we have a tendency. I think we're better equipped to even have the idea that the narrative might be being cultivated, not reported. Right. That the narrative is managed. Right. And so I do think that that's something like folks like you and me are able, maybe on some level, to be better suited to see. But what I'm worried about is sort of this overreactionary, it's all, psyops, and it's all, the Masons, or it's all the, whatever the big bad boogeyman happens to be. And I'm seeing that in spades too. And, and the Catholic version of that is like, oh God, whatever. It's like, well, this is what happens when, the Pope doesn't consecrate Russia to the Virgin Mary. And I was like, people, come on, like this is just stop it. You're just replacing one managed narrative with another one.
But this is what Hannah Arendt said was a precondition of a precursor to totalitarianism. When people stopped believing in truth and started believing in whatever suited their own favorite personal narrative.
I mean, Rod, are we not just seeing that in space? I mean, flip on Twitter and scroll for 10 minutes on Twitter. And, I very consciously follow, a ton of normie right, normie left, far right, far left. I really do try to make sure that my timeline is populated with lots of different types of voices. But
you celebrate diversity, Kale.
That's right. That's right.
I admire you.
Doing my little part here, but I don't feel good. Like I'm worried. Like I'm genuinely worried. With the fog of war right now.
Well, as you should be. One of the things that just scared me this week, and it finally hit me when I'm sitting there at breakfast in Madrid, and I see that Senator Lindsey Graham, senior Republican senator, tweeted out something saying, some Russian ought to kill Putin. Just take him out. I'm like, what in the actual hell is wrong with you?
I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe that.
John McCain from Beyond the Grave. So it might be good if that happened, but guess what? If you're a senior a senator of the United States, you don't say that.
You
don't
can't.
say
It's totally irresponsible. It's totally irresponsible.
Yeah.
You know, to pollute the digital commons with that kind of garbage. I mean, good Lord. I mean, it's not like you're some sort of you know, sock puppet anonymous account with a Latin name, you know, and you know with little emojis, and you're friggin' Lindsey Graham, man.
Okay.
Like, start pretending like you're a damn senator.
But you know what occurred to me watching that? I'm like, oh my God, this could be World War III could be started by Twitter.
Absolutely.
I'm totally serious about that
Yeah.
because, you know, think about the only time that I'm aware of, that any of us are aware of, that we really came close to nuclear war. That was a Cuban Missile Crisis. Think about if Twitter had been around then, what would have happened?
You can't. For those listening, I'm shaking my head in despair right now.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, I'm not a fan of Joe Biden, but I think he's done a pretty good job of keeping the lid on things here. When you see so many people on the left and the right screaming for, we can't let this happen. How can we sit back and let Russia do that? You want to just yell at these people, because they have nuclear weapons. If we get into a shooting war with them, it could become nuclear in a moment, in a flash, no pun intended.
Well, question for you. Why, you know, I share your concerns naturally. You know, why do you think it seems so easy for people to forget the fact that that's looming in the background?
Yeah, because we haven't had to live with it for 30 years. I mean, I think that's the only thing I can think of. I mean, the nuclear threat never went away. Russia still has always had its weapons, and so have we. But after the Cold War, you know, suddenly the world knew a period of peace when it was much, much less likely that this was going to happen. And there were reductions in arms, but we still have enough to blow the world up many times over.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we just got out of the habit of thinking about this. It has been on my mind since Russia invaded and everything. Suddenly, all of Europe is up in arms, screaming, understandably, about what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I have not had. I've been having thoughts I haven't had, Kale, since I was a kid at the end of the Cold War, as a teenager. I don't. How much younger are you than I am?
I'm only 5 years younger than you, so I know I'm right there with you, man. You know, and I had a great conversation with a friend of mine. He's a guy who listens to our podcast, and you know, we were joking that he and I are the same age, and you know, I think I tweeted this out the other day. I said something like, "Man, I haven't thought about you know, total annihilation in any serious way, you know, since I was an 11th grader." When the wall fell down, you know, and so we were kind of talking about that,
Sure.
and as Gen Xers, you know, we're this sort of weird. Aaron Wren actually had a really great piece. I'll link to it below in the show notes about kind of Gen X is sort of, are we stepping up right now? But anyway, my point, my conversation with my friend is that, you know, we have this memory, and it's not like we sat around every day being like, oh my gosh, the Russians are going to blow us up, but you know, it was pretty regular. You know, I mean, it was.
You're always reminded about it.
Absolutely, and you know, and it was real. It was an actual real thing. And here we are, like this sort of weird throwback. It's been, let's see, 25, 30 years, 30 years. Yeah, like you said, 30 years since I've thought about it seriously, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, we're back.
Okay, but here's the thing, though. On social media, I don't know about your feed, but I'm seeing people who are old enough to know better.
That's right.
Talking about we got to get in there, you know, and it's unnerving because, you know, this is not just a simulation. This is the real world. The guy, one of the Hungarians I was talking to today, was telling me he's afraid that Poland is going to be the tripwire. Because the Poles, I mean, both the Hungarians and the Poles hate the Russians. Anybody who's occupied by the Russians.
Well, you should. I mean, they've every reason to, because the Russians were freaking savage, man. Talk to my Romanian friend, Tom, on Twitter, man. He's Romanian. It's like, yeah, like, you know, do a little bit of a, you know, jump through post-war history. It is brutal and gruesome.
Sure it is. So, but the Hungarian today, this Hungarian guy was telling me that the Poles, maybe because of the Katyn Forest massacre or whatever, they're ready to fight them again.
Wow.
And he's afraid, as you know, somebody like Poland, they border on Ukraine. He's afraid that Polish aggression is going to draw NATO into a world war with Russia. And I mean, this is this kind of conversation that I don't know if this guy has a social media presence or not. It's just a guy I met at the best. But I wonder if he could say that, but without being savaged by people on the left who are like, well, how dare you say that? You're hurting the cause. That's something I'm seeing too, man.
Well, think about the way that Twitter draws you in, and I'm guilty of this myself. I'm trying really hard to be better about it, but it draws you into this sort of strange performativity idiom, where you're sort of fighting and flexing, and talking bombastically, and you're doing all these sort of things that in real life you would be much more cordial, if for no other reason than that if I sounded this way in real life, there's a very real chance that I would get punched in the face. And like, you know what I mean? Like there's a realness to that where Twitter, doesn't like there's no cost, right? There's no cost to me being a snarky ass, a jerk. Sorry, me being a jerk on Twitter. Whereas in like real life, if I were talking to somebody this way, I'd get punched.
Okay, this is an interesting point. I was talking to a friend who saw the thing I put on my blog about at the University of North Texas.
Oh yeah,
a group of pro-trans people broke into a room where a Texas House of Representatives candidate who's against transgenderism was talking, and they shut him down. And the video was taken and put online, but taken down after the guy who filmed it, who was sympathetic to the protest, realized that Andy Ngo was sitting out saying, see? Anyway, this guy I was talking to told me, I felt like watching that. I felt like I was watching Twitter take flesh.
Yeah. That's wow. That's a really
Isn't
good.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And another guy I talked to this week told me that an old girlfriend of his, he's married to somebody else, but he said an old girlfriend of his got in touch with him this week and said she's becoming a male. Now,
right.
She is a male. She is a male.
Ray is, right. It's like
he said that we had actually talked about getting married at some point, but he said she's really, really smart. She's in her mid-30s, and we broke up, and she never found anybody, and now she's a man, she says. And I just want to say to her, I know you're not a man,
right?
That you don't want to. She seems very fragile, and anyway. But the reason I bring that up is because I was reading last night on the flight back from Madrid. In this book by Matthew Crawford, the guy best known for Shopcraft as
Soulcraft. Great God,
Shop Class as Soulcraft. He's got a subsequent book. It's called The World Beyond Your Head, and I'm reading it it came out a few years ago. Really good book, but I picked it up again to reread it for my own new book project. And I was reading it on the flight back last night, and things weren't really clicking. This book came out before the whole trans thing blew up. But he was talking about how we today in the West have created a world that is supposed to be frictionless. People expect it to be frictionless thanks to the use of technology. And the thing he used to explain this was Disney cartoons. And he said, if you go back and look at the early Mickey Mouse cartoons and even mid-century Mickey Mouse cartoons, the humor comes from Mickey and Goofy and the others interacting with the physical world and it not acting like they want it to. He said, for example, a spring will come out and burst out of nowhere, or a Murphy bed will fall out of the wall.
That's right. Classic.
But he said, but what this tells us is, this we all laugh at this because we know that this is what it's like to live in the real world. Things don't work like they're supposed to, and that's funny. He said, contrast that to what the Mickey Mouse Club has become in the 2000s. And this is not something I was aware of because my kids didn't watch that. But he talks about how it's just not funny anymore. In fact, it's anti-funny because the way it works is it was not focused on the comic clash with the real world, the physical world, the material world, but on solving problems with technology. He said when they have a problem, Mickey will call out Toodles, which is like a computer that comes down out of the ceiling, and they put the input in there, and the computer solves the problem.
This is
Isn't
very,
that weird?
very King's Northian, the
Right.
machine, isn't it?
Right.
That's
Well, but this is what Matt Crawford, who's a philosopher,
yeah,
and a motorcycle mechanic,
yeah.
what he says is this is training. This has trained an entire generation to think that anything that causes them problems
Mhm.
is this is my term, like a glitch in the matrix, and can be fixed with technology. All you have to do is call on
Mhm.
technology and
Mhm.
authority to
Yes.
insert itself and fix it. Well, I'm sitting there reading that. I'm like, this is what transgenderism is. This I think accounts
Yeah.
for a lot of it. The idea that
Well,
if you get
this is Mary Harrington's point, right? This is Mary Harrington's point that it's a sort of a, this sort of meat Lego,
Mhm.
reworking, rewiring, technologizing. It's transhumanism, right?
Sure.
Transgenderism is ultimately transhumanism.
Right, but
Sorry.
and again, that as far as I've read in the book, this is my
Mhm.
second time.
Mhm.
Transgenderism doesn't come up, but just the
Mhm.
things he was talking about the way the human psyche is changing. We are no longer or losing our ability to relate to material reality. We are becoming stuck inside our heads, and we come to believe that the world exists as a projection of ourselves. It's really
Wow.
interesting to read that. And then, so when you hear about people who, like every teenager, when you're 13, 14, so you're uncomfortable in your body, when
Right.
you begin to think that there's something wrong here, and it's not something that I should learn to live with or deal with or push
Mhm.
through, but it's something that can be solved by hormones and surgery and change, making everybody conform to this unreality. So I'll do away with my anxiety. This is what you get.
Well, I've been in correspondence with a young woman who published a Substack a couple of weeks ago, Helena. And actually, I'm going to get her on the show. She's a big fan of Live Not by Lies,
Oh, good, good.
and that's one of the things I really want to talk to her about is the way in which this sort of uh, solving problems vis-a-vis technology and projected persona. It's God, I
Mhm.
think there's really something there. I'm glad that you're hitting on this again, not for the necessarily for the culture war points, but rather this sort of this deeper sense
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
of it. It's almost, well. Let me ask you this, Rod. Do you think that technology has a spirit?
Hmm.
I'm sorry. I
What do you
maybe
mean by that? What do
yeah,
you mean by the
yeah.
question?
Well, I guess you have been thinking a lot and writing. This is where you've been orienting toward this whole idea of re-enchantment, that we find a world
Mhm.
disenchanted. It's matter and blocks and flesh that we can just sort of move around and resort and all of that. Part of our conversation with Paul Vanderklay last time was focusing on this. Um, but does technology have a have its own designs on us?
I honestly don't know how to answer that,
Yeah,
but because
yeah,
well, I think what technology does. I mean, something Michael Hanby, the Catholic philosopher of science at Catholic U, says that the sexual revolution is the technological
right.
revolution applied to the body. And that's a deep insight. And what he means is by the technological revolution, the idea that we can use technology to work our will on the world. And when that teaches us that there are no intrinsic limits in nature, that we can do
Right.
whatever we want to the world. Is all that we need is the technological know-how to build the technology that to make the world do what we want. Well, this is where ultimately where transhumanism
Mhm,
comes
mhm,
in, the abolition of man. I
mhm.
think the sexual revolution, we should understand transgenderism as as the next phase of the sexual revolution. The
Yeah,
sexual revolution, which says that if we feel it, it's the feeling justifies itself. Somehow we managed to keep pedophilia and bestiality out and incest outside of that, but I don't see how that can hold. Absent any strong taboos in religion and culture.
well,
But anyway,
there are no rational reasons for it,
right,
right?
right, right,
It's
right,
they're only religious ones.
right.
Ultimately, call them whatever you want to call them, but they're
Yeah,
ultimately just religious.
yeah. Anyway, I think though that Matthew Crawford. I don't think he's a religious person necessarily, but reading what he's saying about how we have been conditioned in late modernity and to think of the world beyond our heads as just stuff. It's stuff that we can manipulate. It doesn't have anything to teach us about who we are as human beings, but it should all be manipulated for our own comfort.
Yeah.
This, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking that, well, my God, this is what Mustafa Mond offers
Yes,
in
totally.
Brave New World.
Yes, yes.
And this is why John the Savage, the dissident in Huxley's Brave New World, he wants suffering. He wants struggle, because that is how that is what it is to be human. You know, when you have nothing but comfort provided by money and technology, you lose your basic humanity. And that, even though Brave New World doesn't come up in Crawford's book, that's what he's talking about. And for my purposes in this new book, people are going to forget to look for God because they don't think there's anything out there.
This is really good, Rod. No, I think maybe our second or third episode, I sort of jokingly quipped, that instead of the Benedict option, we're probably going to have to settle with the John the Savage option, because I do think that there's something real in this, and in what you're talking about with Mustafa Mond and with Crawford's talking about that our technologies condition us, right, to believe that the world is stuff. And what we see, what C.S. Lewis calls, the tradition of old books. I think what the tradition of old books teaches us is that, that the natural world is in a very real way our access to an understanding of the mind and the heart of the Creator, right? So that the book of life is every bit as revelatory as the book of Revelation, right? That, from a religious standpoint. And so it makes perfect sense then if you want to reject the Creator or creation, that the thing that you have to do is become a master and dominator over creation in this sort of dark Cartesian Satan in Paradise Lost way. And so, of course, the logic of this, it wasn't enough just to learn how to selectively sterilize ourselves, in vis-a-vis the pill, et cetera. But we must somehow learn to overcome even our sex, even our body, even our souls.
To make it all sense. Subject to the will. And,
that's right.
And I at the same time,
and not the intellect, right? Not the intellect. It's right. The will, because the intellect is that which allows us to comprehend the good, God, et cetera, and so on and so forth. But it's the will, it's the assertion of the thing. Man, that's really rich.
Yeah, and Ian McGilchrist, I'm talking a lot about him and his new book, The Matter with Things, very dense book. But I'm reading the part in the book now towards the end where he starts talking about physics and what we're learning about reality from physics. And it's too complex to go into right now, but and I'm still thinking about it. But he says that what physics basically tells us is that books, that literature, art, these sideways, the indirect ways of knowing actually give us a more accurate picture of reality itself than the purely scientific way of knowing it. This is something that is radically anti-modern. Totally. It happens, but McGilchrist is not a religious man. He said it happens to be true. And, and I was reading that thinking on the plane back and or on the plane over there. I read Crawford on the way back, and the way over there I was reading McGilchrist, thinking about this mania that's now taken over, this moral panic about Russian music, Russian literature, Russian culture, that it all has to out with it all. We can't be tainted by it. Isn't that so typical of our era? The idea that the existence of beauty created by Russians is intolerable, so we're going to blind ourselves to it, stick hat pins in our ears so we don't have to hear Rachmaninoff
obviously, the crypto Putin apologist Dostoevsky needs to be run right out of the academy. We cannot have, Turgenev or Dostoevsky or Rahman. No way. This is all, we're supporting the war effort. And how dare you support the war effort?
But this is a more acute version of what's been happening before the war. What's happening to the West, the idea that we decolonize our bookshelves. Joseph Conrad has nothing to say to us. He's dead white males. And it is a way of choosing stupidity, of choosing not to know. And to read Ian McGilchrist talking about epistemology and the human person and the brain, and how actually art, music, literature, poetry, religion is not a complete way of knowing, but a superior way of knowing. And then to see what we're doing to our libraries, for political reasons, whether it's we hate Russia this week or we hate dead white European males last week, it's a decivilizing process.
It's hard, when we're having these kind of conversations, Rod, it's hard not for me to hear the cackling sotto voce voice of Uncle Screwtape.
Yeah.
It's like if I were, let's just say, for the sake of the conversation, that you and I believed in demonic beings. We do. But let's just say, or let's just posit that these beings exist and that they want to muck things up severely, like they have it out for God and his creation. I mean, what would you do differently?
Yeah. There's a Paul Kingsnorth short story about this.
Really?
Get what it's called. Yeah, go on to paulkingsnorth.net, put the link in after the show's up.
Yeah.
But it's in the form of letters from an elderly academic to his niece about this very thing, and about how technology and the way we relate to it there's something demonic going on here about stealing our souls. And I think Paul wrote this before he became a Christian. He just sensed it because
he could intuit it. He can intuit
artists
it.
Can. The artists always know first.
Our artists know and see first. Absolutely. And we know this. I know our philosophical friends don't like to admit this, but it's true. Yeah. Right. A true artist sees first.
There's a great book by this Latvian American or Latvian Canadian academic named Modris, Modris Eckstein.
Great.
Modris Eckstein. Do you know what I'm talking about? Called The Rites of Spring.
One of my favorite all-time books.
Isn't it fantastic?
So good.
And it starts out with the premiere in 1913 in Paris of Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. And it was such a violent orchestral work. It shattered the canon. There was a riot in the concert hall. But what Eckstein goes on, he connects that to World War I. And what he says is that these artists, if you look at music and painting then, before the war started out, they felt it all coming. It was all coming, and they felt it. I remember going once to when I was in Manhattan, living there, spring of 2003. I went with Peggy Noonan, the Wall Street Journal writer. We were friends back then. And we went to an exhibit at the Neue Gallery on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It was showing like interwar German art, like pre-World War I and pre-World War II German and Austrian art, expressionist art. And it was pretty scary stuff. And Peggy said at one point, we were looking at one canvas, and she said, "You can hear the train to Auschwitz coming around the bend in that one, can't you?" Yeah, you can. You can. And I think though that our artists today, so many of them have become so blind to that sort of thing because they want to be political, but they shut off their ability to see the world as it actually is because they want so badly. In the same way that so many kitschy evangelical or Catholic artists, they want to make it fit a message. Yeah, it loses touch with reality.
Well, that's right. They've become either parasitized or captured by the grift, I suppose. It's a real shame. It's a real shame, and it could prove our undoing.
Well, it's fear, though, don't you think? I mean, I know that.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, think about what's happening with your friend and mine. There's really more your friend, Steve Skojec. I think I'm afraid for him because he's on the verge, it seems, of losing his Catholic faith because he just can't take the rigidity of the trads anymore. He was a big part of the traditionalist world, a polemicist and all that, and he finally just hit the wall. I pray for him. I literally do. And I hope he comes out of this. I send him notes of encouragement. But I think that if he comes out of this with his faith intact, he is going to be an incredible truth teller because he no longer feels that he has to mold his perceptions to fit a rigid script, the trad script. And look, we all know it's not just a right-wing Catholic thing. Everybody has a script that they don't want to deal with, and that they try to fit the world into.
Right.
And it broke Steve, because Steve had a very highly developed, as far as I can tell, just from reading him, highly developed script that explained the world to him, the traditionalist Catholic script. And it just, you had to ignore too much reality to make that work.
Right, but he had a bigger commitment, and I think that it proved it has unraveled his détente with the world. Right, his détente with the world was a sort of a trad heuristic. Right, that this explained everything. Like I can simplify my life. Like this is how it is. We all have these. This is not a slap against the trads. We all have our versions of these.
We all do.
Yeah. Just to be clear. But if you have a higher commitment to the truth, then this is why I think the ultimate value has to be truth. It can't be protecting the shield. It can't be about protecting the brand. It can't be about protecting the worldview. The truth has to be the thing. And look, this is what I wrote in that piece that I published with Steve, over a year ago, is that, we have to be on, I jokingly said, we have to be on team Justin Martyr. Because if it's true, it's Christian. And we have to be utterly fearless and dogged in making that our North Star. Because if something else is our North Star, it's going to run up against truth. And that's when that gap opens up, and that's where things unravel and you start to do things in a mendacious fashion. This is all part of the sort of the church breakdown that blew you up, is that we have people who are guardians of this thing that we believe is the most important thing. Right, Jesus, right, and those guardians would rather protect position, influence, power, and politics over the fundamental truth of the gospel. And so there are lots of versions of that, right? There are lots of copes, right? So if you can think of, Steve and the sort of the trad thing as a kind of a cope, what you're coping against is the explosiveness of experience. You can't fall in love with your cope.
Well, and this, to go back to what we were saying a second ago about this moral panic that is canceling all Russian writers. I think if you want to understand what's happening right now between Russia, Ukraine, and in the broader world, you need to go read Dostoevsky and Tolstoy.
Totally.
And it's because there's a reason they're universally beloved as some of the greatest writers of all time, because they saw into the human soul, not just the Russian soul, but the human soul.
That's right.
And we are at a time when we need to know more than ever what's happening, what's really happening. And if Ian McGilchrist is correct that it's the artists, the writers, the poets, the sages who give us a more accurate, not a complete, but a more accurate take on the world than the scientists and the sophisters and the calculators, then the people we should be protecting most are the artists and their work. But we can't do that because we want, as we were saying a second ago, we want this frictionless world, right?
Right. But the systems of cultivation, the patronage and all of those things which make art possible, they've been captured, Rod. This is the problematic thing, right? They've either been captured by a kind of progressivist agenda or some kind of ideological agenda, if it's evangelical Christians or conservative Catholics or whatever, right? They've all been captured. And so where are they? Where are our artists? Where are our prophets? Because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. They're not going to come out of these schools, the official schools.
Right.
When I say schools, I mean this broadly, not just the academy. But
Right.
I remember back in, Kale, it was New Year's Eve, 1994.
Okay.
I was in Oslo, Norway, visiting a friend, and I was at a party, and I met this young guy around my age in his, mid-20s.
Yeah.
And he had just graduated with a master's degree from art school in Oslo. And he was angry about it. He said, I don't know anything. I wasn't taught anything. He said, from the very beginning of my artistic education, they told all of us, you're young geniuses. So I don't know how to draw. I don't know how to do drafting. It was all about express yourself. And he was resentful because he believed that the people in his society, in his tradition, who are supposed to pass the tradition on and help him learn what he himself had to give to the world as an artist, they had failed.
Right. This is Scruton's point about Duchamp's urinal, right? You know, that we've been now living more than 100 years in this world in which the academies, again, formal or informal, have abandoned the masters. They have abandoned the tradition. They have abandoned this vast body of knowledge and applied wisdom for the sake of sort of this weird expressionism, right? And so I'm not surprised that this friend of yours at a party in 1994 graduated and was just sort of disgusted with himself and what he had been through.
Yeah, he had been dispossessed by his own people in the name of liberation.
Right.
You know,
right.
liberating the self. And I see as we are coming to the end here, I want to tell you that tonight here in Budapest, a friend of mine is coming over, and we're going to watch Andrei Tarkovsky's Nostalgia. Again, for me, this will be the fourth time, but I guess we're going to be politically incorrect and watch a Russian film director. But Tarkovsky is one of the all-time greats. Came out of the Soviet Union, and even during the Cold War, nobody canceled Tarkovsky. Meanwhile, this past week, the Glasgow Film Festival and the Stockholm Film Festival kicked out 2 Russian films just for being Russian, right? But anyway, Tarkovsky's Nostalgia, as the poor subscribers to my newsletter know, because I can't stop talking about it, it's a movie about a man, a writer who can't write, he can't create, he can't see the world outside his head because he's stuck inside his head. And so every time I watch this movie, because it's Tarkovsky, there's so much depth there, I learned something new about the nature of human beings and the nature of reality. This young man who's coming over to watch it tonight is a colleague of mine at the Danube Institute here in Budapest. And I didn't realize he's a big film buff and he loves Tarkovsky. So I'm sure this young Hungarian is going to have something to teach me.
Wow, that's great.
This is what I love about art and being able to talk freely about it. I'm sure these people who are so wrapped up in people in the West in their rage at Russia, and I understand it against the Russian government, but when you would pluck out your eyes and pierce your eardrums so you don't have to see Russian movies or hear Russian culture, you're an idiot. Well, this Hungarian told me today his parents had fled Hungary to get away from communism. He is the son of refugees. He said, whatever else you say about Russia, they have one of the world's great cultures. Nobody has exceeded them. Few have matched, and nobody has exceeded them for all their barbarism. We can't be human without Russian culture.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of how I would conceive of the world if I had to scratch off, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Turgenev and Gogol. Like, there's such a huge part of my imagination. Like, I don't know how I'd see the world without them. And to sort of just blithely just get rid of them reasons. Baddies, dumb.
Rachmaninoff's Vespers. I don't know if you know them, but there's some of this beautiful music you'll ever hear. And for me, as an Orthodox Christian of 16 years, I have been given a profound gift through Russian religion. Orthodoxy is not just Russian, there's Greek Orthodox, there's Arab Orthodox, but I have the primary form of Orthodoxy that I've focused on has been in the Slavic Russian tradition. And, I hate that the Patriarch of Moscow is not fully condemning the war. But guess what? Russian Orthodoxy goes way beyond whoever's sitting on the patriarchal throne in Moscow right now. So, I'm going to stick with it and encourage people to stick with it. Watch Russian movies, read Russian books, criticize Russian militarism and Russian politics all you want. I'll be right there with you. But please do not abandon culture.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, on that note, man, I'll enjoy the movie tonight. I am almost done with my grades and comments for the term, so I'm going to, take some time off and hopefully focus on some writing projects. I'm actually writing something on nostalgia, so I hope
on the movie nostalgia, or
the idea, the phenomena of nostalgia and the good, the bad, and what I think it's doing. Why I think we are in this sort of moment of nostalgia right now, because I think it's a spiritual yearning. So I'll leave it at that.
Have you ever seen the Tarkovsky film?
No, it's Yeah.
You shouldn't have
I know,
said
I know,
that because now
I
I'm
know,
going to be
I know,
all
I know,
over you.
I know.
No, because what it is you'll see in the movie, nostalgia is not only nostalgia for the past, but nostalgia for the future, which is a weird
Correct.
concept.
No. You're exact. I think that's exactly right because, yeah. Sorry. Mhm.
Anyway, I'm just saying, watch it. There'll be
All
a
right.
quiz later, friend.
All right. He's gonna say, I'm not gonna shoot another show with you until you watch the movie, Kale. Like, fair enough, Dreer. Fair
All
enough.
right.
All right, man.
And look, don't get nothing on you.